So this is in, I tried to put everything, all the little links there. There are many interlinks, and although this is put as a diagram, it's all the interactions are not as simple as just looking at it. So I've put together some factors which influence the use of the reefs and hence the value. So first, from the top, physical characteristics, the resource type. Now, the way people depended a lot on the resource type. For example, as I said before, the sand and coral reefs, these are stationary resources which do not move so much. And even in the traditional times, I didn't find many local rules formed for the use of sand or coral. And the more formal rules appeared as state rules. But in contrast, the fish, the scads, the use of these had a lot of locally developed rules. And this is because I believe that fish is not a stationary resource, it's mobile. It's there for only a finite period of time and it would go away. So people had to make a lot of rules to ensure it stayed there for a long time. They can make the best use of the resource. And so depending on the type, whether it was mobile or stationary, there was some differences in use. And again, the availability, as I said about the scads before, how people actually interact with the use. Earlier it was used as a staple, as a food source, but now it's become more recreational. This is again related to availability. It's not there as frequently. It doesn't stay there for a long time. Even the community, which scads had stayed there for 15 years, they'd say it doesn't come there anymore. Maybe 1 year it might come, another 2-3 years it wouldn't come. So it's not so frequent. So the availability, this has changed. And this leads to, again, one of the reasons why there's less interactions with the resource, and there's a lot of other factors, like the community is not staying in the island. So a lot of reasons why the interaction had reduced. And with it, the local knowledge. And these local knowledge, because we are losing our local, we use and interact with the resources are changing. But at the same time, when we use it less, again, also is changing. This can be, for example, the cowrie shell, with the money cowrie, which before the Maldives, in the world we were using cowrie as money. And a lot of the cowrie was harvested inside these lagoons, and we had a lot of, so everybody knew how to harvest these cowries, but now it's not used as money anymore. We do not go and collect it. I don't know if we can even think you can find some on the beach, but because we do not practice this anymore, I don't know there would be many people who would hold as much knowledge about the practice. So there's a lot of cultural value that is changing. And the physical characteristics of islands, I found, it depended on, say, larger islands, maybe with a larger lagoon, they had more fish. Or at the bigger beach, there was more sand. And there was two communities which I visited, which was one physical island. But in one side of in the one community, they got more fish in the lagoon, whereas the sand was much better. There was more sand on the other island community. And the way they interacted with the resource changed because of this also. And resource location. I'll use the example of sand, where I had said earlier that the traditional use of putting white sand on the courtyards, this practice has now gone. And in some ways it's because it's more difficult to access sand, whereas before you can take from the beach. Now you have to actually buy from someone who mines sand, and which is going further to a designated spot where you can actually take and collect sand. So all these added difficulties, that the location of where the resource is has changed, and it's difficult to access. So that traditional use, I think one of the main reasons for the disappearance of that use is that you do not have access to the sand anymore. And similarly, even in, so those are more the physical characteristics, and the individual community and characteristics and variations among communities is the more social aspects I looked into, where you would find in a larger community, there would be more less kinship relations, and personal relations would be less compared to the smaller community. Now, many of us are here from the Maldives, and we would think it's not very much possible in a Maldivian community. Everybody knows everybody. And probably even in this room, there would be some way all of us would be connected, and it's much smaller. But even still, knowing this and seeing this, I was able to distinguish between the smaller communities and the larger communities. There was still less kinship relations, personal relations, and hence the impacts on the market exchanges as well. For example, in the larger communities I visited with more people, there were fish from the reef fish is sold more in shops. Whereas in the smaller communities, any fisherman who catches reef fish might give to his family, friends, and maybe sell a little which is left over, but priority remains giving to his family and friends. So these are still some of the changes. And again, larger communities, the resource governance is much more difficult, more complex than smaller communities. So, again, all those reasons, this migration to Malé is one of the very key changes I noted in my work, because it, in addition to the reduced personal interactions, there's the reduced interaction with resources and the Western schooling, which is all contributing to how we value and how we get our reef resources. Now, one of the interesting things when I visited some of the islands was some of the elders would come up and ask me, which family do you belong to, where? And I would say, they were assuming I was from the island, and I would say I'm not from this island. Now, traditionally, everyone would know everyone else, but now, since many families, I think it's over 30 years or a little bit over, this trend of migration had started. So there's generations which lived, and then subsequent generations are born here and with just visiting for holidays. Some of the elders actually do not know the younger generation whether they are from the island or not. So that's why they were asking, some would ask me which house I'm from, which family do I belong to. But this is because they thought I was from the island, and they would say, it's very hard now, we don't know the children of this island anymore. So that's just one demonstration of the reduced personal interactions. And so with this reduced personal interactions, it's much easier to form market relations, to sell things rather than give. Now here I want to tell a story about a young woman I met in my field work. We happened to travel together to the island. She was permanently living in Malé, but she was visiting because at the time her mother had gone abroad for medical purposes, and her dad was living alone. So she wanted to go and help her dad. And her dad is a fisherman on the island. He's one of the few elders who still continue to go fishing. And when he brings fish, her mother cooks the fish, dries it, and makes it ready for smoked fish for selling. Now, while her mother is away, her father brings the catch and takes it to her aunt's house, and it's there that the aunt does the job of processing the fish. So while I actually stayed with this family, and so I was able to observe some of these interactions much closely. So her dad would say when he goes fishing, if you need fish for cooking, go to your aunt's and get the fish. And even one day her aunt sent her cousin and to tell her to come and get fish. But this young woman didn't go to her aunt's house. She preferred to go to the store around the corner and buy canned tuna. So, and I really, because this is fish her dad had caught, and this is not from somebody else, but still I asked her about it, and she was saying it's a bit awkward to go and get tuna from her aunt's house, and I didn't think, why would this be awkward? Why? And maybe I went to think because of her continued living in the Malay society where you don't know your neighbors anymore, and those kind of very personal relations, and where you borrow from your neighbor, and these things, and you go and buy things from the shop. So this has impacted her, and even to me, I saw this is training the very kinship relations as well. So here was an example of how interactions, the value changes, not just not just the value of reefs as well, but the social relations, all these things are changing. So this was very interesting observation and talk I had with her, and something that we wouldn't, and she found it really difficult to answer my questions. Why? I ask a lot of questions. And so now I'll go to the next one, the changing worldviews, which, as you can see, I have put two things impacting it, our schooling and our reduced interaction with the resources. Now, in our schools, I'll be talking more about how we learn about the environment, or rather what we learn about the environment in schools. And this is relating not just as what I learned myself, but I have a 12-year-old son who is learning at school, and he learns from the environmental science textbooks, and when I look at his textbooks and things, there's a lot about climate change, global warming, global climates and things like that, and there's very little about our local environment. Am I right in this? You'll learn more about the global environment than the local. And in the grade 5 textbook, I note while I was helping my son with his lessons, fishing is titled Fishing Industry. This is just denoting a market, and in this absent the cultural, the social aspects of fishing, which are linked with the traditions, and it's we are learning to care about a global environment and not much about our local environment. So there are for example, about fishing, we could have maybe had some things about the traditional stories that were passed down by fishermen, maybe talk about how did the fishermen catch the bait, how did they process it, what was the role of women, all these things. Now these were things I was surprised that to learn during my visit to the communities. These were things I maybe perhaps knew but didn't actually observe or consciously know. So this was a thing, and perhaps while I was in school, we learned a little bit more what's being taught now about the local environment. And again, a demonstration of the changing worldviews is because I was there to do environmental research. Many of the young people who had just finished year 10 or year 12 were very interested to talk to me. Now, I find environment is a very interesting topic for the school leavers. Because we make it very important and we talk about it at global levels. So they would come and talk to me, and they would be showing, actually they'd be showing how appalled they were at people were taking sand, mining sand, not from the beach, but even for their livelihood, taking sand. And because what this is a concern for the local environment is they're relating it to climate change, sea level rise, erosion, and how if you take sand, it contributes to erosion, and if there's climate change and sea level rise, we would be impacted. So all these global concerns are there. And I say again, this is not, one could argue that this is a sign of showing concern for the environment, but my interpretation was this is concern for global environment based on some other observations I made of the interactions these young people had with the reef resources, mainly fish in the lagoons. Now they would go and use nets to catch the fish, some would take spears and go to catch fish. And to me, this is not the same concern. If you're concerned about nature, you should be concerned about the welfare of the fish as well. But because this was their holiday, they were interacting recreationally, and they have not learned to take, to be so concerned about the local environment. This is not a big thing. But on the other hand, the elders were very upset. They would tell me they were very upset about the behavior of the young people. They were using spears, and they were extremely upset and say it will hurt the fish. So there was two different ways of valuing these fish, which I was seeing from the elders and the younger generation. And I think this is to do with the changing worldviews, whereas one has been living in the environment, interacting directly with the resource, and this has developed their local worldviews. But for the other, you learn from textbooks, you learn about the environment, caring for a global environment, and the local environment is something you interact little with. So this is, for me, the basis of the different worldviews. And there are many other stories inserted within my work, and it's quite big to talk about all of the observations and findings, but these are just a few things